Welcome back to your favorite show, your favorite podcast, the Extra Podcast. My name is Daniel Markin, and I have one guest in this room. Let's play Guess That Guest. You have 5 seconds to guess your guest. Okay, I'll give you the answer. We are joined around the table by Greg Harris. Hello, Greg.
Hi, Daniel. Welcome back from Uganda.
Thank you, Greg.
You were away with a young adult mission team.
That's correct.
And Pastor Ezra Okoti led the trip.
Mm-hmm. Ezra's in the studio with us right now. Oh, thank you, Greg, for the shout out. I have to go. I'm a very busy man.
Thanks, Ezra.
Great to have you, Ezra. Thanks for being here.
Ezra hasn't been on the show in a long time, has he?
No.
Has it been months?
No. Well, he came on one recently, and it was one of the best episodes we've ever had.
No way.
Uh-huh.
Really?
Yeah.
Why?
He's got the magic.
Ezra is very underrated.
Yeah.
You know?
The guy's a well of wisdom.
He is.
And he brings a nice perspective to it. But yeah, the guy's a lot smarter than people give him credit for.
It's true.
We give him a lot of, we make fun of him a lot around here. But we like Ezra a lot, don't we, Greg?
We do. I'm a big fan.
A big fan. Speaking of being a fan, you know what's coming up? Comes once every 4 years.
The World Cup.
World Cup.
Everybody be excited for the World Cup.
Everybody. It's a worldwide event watched by the world.
So you know what I watched the other day, as in last night, on the television?
Solo, the Han Solo movie.
False. I don't actually care about Star Wars. What I watched was a little feature on the Iceland football team.
Wow.
They're a country of like 300,000 people. Mm-hmm. And they're in the World Cup. That's crazy. 300,000 people. That's basically like a country of Abbotsford and Langley making it into the World Cup.
No way.
So imagine Abbotsford and Langley was our own country. We would be able to produce how many players on a World Cup team? 8.
20?
Sure. That we'd be able to produce a team of 20 people competent enough to produce good enough results to get to the World Cup. That's remarkable. And in Iceland, where they said like their fields are
made of ice.
They're indoors. All their soccer fields are in these warehouse looking facilities, and they have a few dozen of them in the country. And
it takes 15 minutes to drive between them.
It would be like, that's crazy. It's crazy. So I was watching this and I thought, you know what? Go Iceland.
So you're going to pull for Iceland?
I think so.
They're going to go to the final?
Yeah. No, I don't know if I actually think they're going to win. I think that they're probably going to be the team now that I watch to see how the results pour in. And I'm going to be rooting for them for sure.
Okay.
That's a great story. 300,000 people. And they can put a team together.
It's a David Goliath story is what it is.
It is. That's the best way to interpret that passage, is that Iceland is David.
And Iceland needs to strike down their Goliath.
That's right.
AKA Germany, AKA Brazil.
Yeah.
And make it to the promised land.
Yeah. So that's
awesome.
I'm glad I watched that last night, because that made me sound like I actually know a little bit about international football, but I don't.
Good. Well, I'm predicting a South American final. I got Argentina beating Brazil in the final.
Ooh.
Yeah, that's what I'm doing. Well, Greg, we wanted to do a podcast today, as we do every week.
We did.
We always want to do a podcast, and sometimes the podcasts don't come. Sometimes we have the robot. This week, however, we thought we'd make this more of a business episode. We have a few things that we should be discussing for the future of our church and the life of our church. And as a result, let's just jump in and start talking about some of these things. You made a big announcement. Well, you had a vision night as well. Why don't you tell people what that is?
Yeah, so people have probably heard by this point. Hopefully they have. But we are excited about starting an East Abbotsford campus. That's going to be launching, kind of open to public in October, on Thanksgiving weekend. October 7th, I believe, is the Sunday. But previous to that, in the month of September, people who are going to be coming from Northview to form the core of that church are going to be meeting in 3 weeks in September at Abbotsford Christian School, which we'll be renting to utilize for the campus, just to test out what it's like to set up the stuff and run the sound and just give it a go to make
It's a
sure
very
we're
bare bones experience.
Totally. And so we're going to have to build it up from the ground up. And so that'll be an opportunity for us to just kind of have we'll have legitimate worship services, but it'll be kind of a practice run for those who are going to be a part of the core team. But all the public information about when we're launching is going to be October 7th. And yeah, so I mean, the goal is basically we have currently tens of thousands of people who live on that side of town in our city. And there are a few churches there, but not nearly enough to reach the area.
There's a lot of churches on this side of town.
A lot of churches west
Gladwin
and
Road
central.
And, yeah.
Not very many once you start getting into East Abbotsford. There are definitely some, and they've been there for a long time, and they're doing good work. But the need is huge. And increasingly so. The city is planning to grow in two main ways. They're planning to densify in the downtown core by another, I think they're saying between 20 and 40,000 people.
Wow.
And they're planning to grow in the east, where they're going to be building a lot of the townhouse complexes and single family homes. Again, upward growth is projected around 40,000 people. So what Abbotsford is looking like is that within the next however many years, we're going to be closer to about 200,000 people as a population base, with the downtown core highly densified and the east part of our city essentially all residential. So there's no real land available in East Abbotsford to purchase, to build on. Last I heard, there was maybe 1 4-acre piece of land that could be for sale. But it costs about $2 million an acre just to purchase the land.
Wow. Not
even bring like services to it,
or build a
building that could hold a few hundred people per service. So, so churches are going to be priced out of owning property in East Abbotsford. So for us to be able to have an opportunity to work with Abbotsford Christian School, rent their space on Sundays, and hopefully develop a really great long-term partnership so that there can be a gospel presence in East Abbotsford, another gospel presence in East Abbotsford for the future moving forward, I think is really exciting. So I'm excited to be able to serve as the campus guy. We're going to have mostly video preach, but a number of live preaching as well from myself. And Jeff and Ezra and myself will come over, and Andy via video. And I'm excited about the team coming with me too. I have Todd Witkins is going to be leading worship, and Thalia Sawatsky is going to come as another pastoral support there, and she'll be a great bridge builder for all kinds of different things we got going on in the life of Northview. And Crystal LaForce is going to be leading our kids ministry, and we have Tessa Sperling, who we stole from you guys and young adults, who's going to be coming over to help us make everything run in East Abbotsford. So the team, I think, is really strong. And we had a vision night a few nights ago on Sunday, and we had a really great showing. A lot of people seemed really engaged and excited. And so we have another one coming up on June 24th.
Cool.
Where we're going to, the first one, we were basically talking big picture. What are we doing? Why are we doing this? The next one, we're going to have more kind of a nitty gritty detailed conversation about, so what is it going to take to actually pull this thing off?
Yeah.
And how do people need to get involved in order for this to actually work? The motive for all of this is the mission of God.
Mission of God.
It's not to just create space at Downs Road. So it doesn't matter how many people we start with. The goal is to reach people who are unchurched and dechurched. So I think that's helpful for us to keep our mind wrapped around the idea that this isn't just a space-saving mechanism for Downs Road. This is an opportunity for us to engage in a part of our city that's growing and under-churched, and see what the Spirit of God might want to do through it.
Okay, so playing devil's advocate. Then.
Do it.
Say I live on that side of town, and the local big church is moving and putting another campus on that side of town. Are they now trying to steal congregants? How would you approach that language? Are you trying to now compete with other churches, or if someone accused you of that, what was how would you respond to that? What kind of language would you use?
The language I would use is that we have zero intention of stealing people from other congregations. The reality with these kinds of things, though, if you talk to some of the guys from some church planning networks like C2C, who operate their offices out of our facility upstairs with MB Mission, some of the other church planting places, they'll tell you that when a new church comes up, there is a bit of sheep shuffling. It happens. But that's not an intention. So if that takes place, I'll probably try to walk a line of saying welcome here, and also maybe consider going back, depending on the reason why you left. Because I've no intention of having people from other churches come just because it's the new thing. But again, God leads people to make decisions about what local church to be a part of for all kinds of different reasons. And so I don't want to do a broad brush and say no one is allowed to come from other churches, because it might be the best move for their family.
Right.
But the intention is to mobilize a core group of people from our church to be serving and inviting people to that local gathered assembly to hear the gospel. And so the intention is one of mobilizing for mission rather than just, getting a few sheep shuffling from different existing churches. So part of my process of going from where we are now to eventually launching is having conversations with the pastors of those churches on that side of town and just saying, how can we pray with you guys? How can we pray for you? Are there ways that we can appropriately partner together? Just try to create good lines of communication to say, look, I have no interest in just taking some of your people.
Yeah.
There's enough room. There's enough work to be done in that part of our city that all of those churches could thrive, and there would still be more work to do.
Yeah. So how can we, and then you can go to them and ask, what are some of the struggles that you've had, particularly on this side of town? What are some of the areas that you're excited to see? And you can get their insight on, because even on other sides of Abbotsford, there's different cultural norms and, and cultural things.
Yeah.
So that'll be actually, I think that's great.
Yeah. So we'll see how it goes. I mean, people ask me quite regularly, what am I expecting? And the short answer is I basically have no idea. I'm expecting that we're going to have church services coming this fall, and we're going to do everything we can to make the kids ministry and the Sunday morning experience really great. To start, we're not going to have our own youth groups or men's or women's Bible studies. We're going to send people to Downs Road for that kind of stuff, just because we just don't know what to expect. We don't know the size. We don't know the needs of that community, of what we're actually going to find when people start coming. What do we need to do to disciple these people well? And how do I mobilize these people to reach their neighbors for Christ? And so we don't want to overcommit to certain strategies beforehand without knowing what strategies we actually need to commit to.
And this is very much a new thing to Northview with this type of church planning and moving forward in that. So all of this is, if we fail, we fail.
Yep.
And if it works, then we'll continue to do the work, and
for sure.
And God will get the glory.
Yeah.
So great. Okay, awesome, Greg. Well, thank you.
Yeah.
For that little bit. I'm sure this will come up over and over again. Obviously, there's the next Vision evening. Did you already mention that?
Yeah, June 24th.
June 24th.
Before June 24th, though, we have a pretty significant meeting for our church family, though, at the congregational meeting.
Yes, we do. So the AGM.
Yeah.
What is the date of the AGM?
It is June 19th. It's a Tuesday night. So anyone who's involved with the ministries of Northview is welcome to attend. We have, if you're a member, then you're actually empowered to vote. But if you are interested, you can attend anyways, if you just want to hear some of the conversation that's going on. And a huge part of the conversation is going to be this vision for multiplication of seeing churches multiplied globally and locally, and establishing a multiplication fund that's going to be in the tens of millions of dollars for the purposes of building here at Downs Road, of planting churches locally and globally. So like really big conversations, like culture shifting for the life of our church kinds of conversations.
Well, culture shifting and attitude shifting too. I mean, we're going to have to sacrifice on certain things. And I mean, for example, like the East Abbey, for the first part, that's not going to be a comfortable place to go worship, but it's going to be, make it as comfortable as you can. And you have your people and you go forward and do the mission of God, right? So it's, and things will grow. But again, like you said, you're not in a worship center, you're in a gymnasium to start.
Yeah.
So it's very rugged, and this might be, I think this is the attitude and the posture that we should have when going forth with the mission of God. Any way possible, we'll do it. And so, yeah, this meeting's interesting because Northview's eldership and governance model is congregationally led. Correct?
Yeah. So our governance structure is an elder-led congregational model. So what that means is that at the end of the day, the congregation has the responsibility to determine the vision and the direction of the church.
As opposed to what are some other models?
So some other models would be strictly elder-led, where the elders just make decisions and set the budget without having to have any approval from the congregation. Some congregations are simply congregationally led. There are no elders that oversee the strategic vision of the church. It's something that's determined by the congregation. So one of the misunderstandings of Northview's particular iteration of congregationalism is that every major decision needs to be made by the congregation.
Yeah.
So for example, one way this gets played out is people will say, well, the congregation should have decided to plant a campus in East Abbotsford or not. That should have been a congregational decision. But the reality is that with our governance model, we have an elder-led congregational model. So what that means is that the congregation appoints elders to lead and provide the vision and the strategy for the congregation. And the way that vision gets implemented is through our annual budget. And so the way the congregation affirms the vision of the elders is by the affirming of the annual budget.
So they'll be affirming the East Abbey plant by the affirming of the budget coming at the AGM.
Yeah, correct.
Okay.
So it wasn't... in other words, our model isn't designed to say that every strategic move of our church has to be a purely congregational approach. What we say is, no, actually, we believe that congregation has appointed elders. We believe that there should be a plurality of elders. We believe that's the New Testament model, that Paul would go into an area and he would plant a church and he would appoint elders of that church. And he tells Timothy, when you go into your church, appoint elders. So there should be a plurality of leaders, and those leaders should be the ones who protect the doctrine and who set the vision of what the church is about. So that's what we do. So the main strategic work, the strategery, is lived out, is implemented by the elders. And then the pastoral and staff team are the ones who actually implement the vision
And execute it.
Cool. And so to do something like an East Abbotsford campus is a strategy that the elders are wanting to pursue. And however, when it comes to major financial involvement in projects, so if we decided we wanted to build something on site at Downs Road.
That's on the table for this meeting, correct?
Right. Yeah. So anything that comes to dollars and massive, significant expenditures, the congregation has to approve those over and above the operating budget kinds of things. So that's where, you could say you don't like the way that the elders are leading the church by voting against the budget, essentially. Yeah. Thankfully, we've had a really great rapport between congregation and elders for a really long time. And I think that the vision that the elders have set with this desire to make disciples by multiplying healthy local churches, I mean, I don't know if there's anything more meat and potatoes, biblical philosophy of ministry than making disciples by multiplying healthy local churches. That's pretty core to what it means to be a Christian church. And so... Cool. So I don't think the vision is big, and it's important, and it's biblical. And I'm optimistic that the congregation is hearing that, and they're seeing it in the scriptures, and they're saying, you know what, the Lord has invested in us as a church, and we need to make good use of that investment and be proactive and aggressive and do whatever we can to see more disciples being made by multiplying healthy local churches. So we'll get to see next Tuesday or June 19th, we're going to be able to see
That's the day.
the congregational elder-led model employed. And you'll hear, right, in some of the questions that'll get raised from the floor, you'll hear people kind of shifting their mind of thinking this is either too congregational or too elder-led, but that's kind of the tension that our church lives in, where we think that the congregation is called to be an autonomous group of people who make decisions for themselves, that we don't necessarily have a group of people over top of us dictating exactly how we need to do ministry. Mm-hmm. We don't have another group of people dictating to us who needs to be our pastors or our elders. That's some other church models where your leadership is just handed to you rather than the congregation discerning those leaders themselves. But rather we have a great hybrid of elder-led congregational that I think gives us enough strategic freedom to actually do something, but also significant accountability to the congregation to make sure that what we're doing is actually what our congregation wants to do.
Yeah. And so the congregation votes, particular members vote.
Yep.
So if you're a member at Northview, we encourage you to come out Tuesday for this very big day in Northview's history. And membership is something is actually really great because, you can have a voice in this, say in this. Mm-hmm. So rather than just sitting on the sidelines, you can actually get involved in that. What about those who aren't members, Greg? Are they able to come to the meeting and observe?
Yeah, for sure.
Cool.
Yeah, if you're interested in the ministries of Northview, if you're invested here, even if you're not an official member, you're invited to come. We're going to be in the worship center, so there's going to be lots of room. The only distinction would be if you're not a member, you won't go to one of the tables to sign in. They're not going to cross your name off the list to say this Daniel Markin is present and he's been given his voting cards. That's the only distinction in terms of your involvement in the event and that kind of stuff. It's all the same. And so
So if you're not a member, just grab a coffee, sit down, and enjoy the discussion and seeing where the church is going. Because I think people would appreciate having you there, and I think it'd be good for you if you're not a member to just be there and consider actually becoming a member as well.
Yeah, and for all of us to just be really prayerful that the Spirit of God would lead us as a community of faith, that there'd be a real clear sense that, this seems good to the Holy Spirit in us to go in this particular direction.
Mm-hmm.
And so, I'm optimistic. I'm not normally optimistic, but I've worked long enough with Kyle Meeker that his optimism is rubbing off on me. But other Kyle Meeker traits have rubbed off on me, including taking photos of things on screens.
Yes.
Like if you're working on a whiteboard and you wrote stuff on a whiteboard before erasing it, you take a photo of it with your phone. I used to think that was super dorky, and now I do it all the time because that's discipleship. Kyle discipled me into that. He just modeled it for years in front of me, and now I'm like, you know what? That actually is very convenient.
It became you.
I'm becoming like Kyle in scary ways. I don't know this was a very profound
direction that we took here.
Yeah. I didn't know this about myself, and this has kind of become like therapy for me.
This is a therapy, Greg. Tell me how you feel about this change of you becoming like Kyle. Do you now have visions of playing D3 basketball?
Let me just lie down on this couch here. I think it actually stems from
Greg is now lying on the table.
This actually stems from being on the bench on the grade 9 basketball team and feeling like I was left out.
No one says no to Greg Harris.
No one says no.
Okay, Greg. Well, so again, come out to the AGM Tuesday and be praying for the AGM as well. As the Lord brings it to mind, we'd ask that we just want to drench and cover all of this in prayer and submit this to the Lord. So, Greg, let's just go to the last thing here. This podcast, the Extra Podcast, has been around for years. I mean, I listened to this when I was a young teenager, couldn't even drive my car. Then I got my license, and guess what I listened to in the car?
The Extra Podcast.
The Extra Podcast. And then when I was lonely in my dorm at college, you know what I listened to?
The Extra Podcast.
The Extra Podcast.
Man.
And when I was bored of other podcasts, you know what I'd go back to and re-listen to?
9 Marks.
The Extra Podcast. Oh. And then do you remember what the first episode was, Greg? What it was called?
I don't.
Groundhog Day.
Really?
It's episode 1 of the Extra Podcast.
Really?
It was, yeah.
Darcy Kuhn hosted.
Yeah, he did.
And it was Ezra, Jeff, and Darcy, just the three of them.
I have no idea. I don't remember. You've had up to almost 8 people at a time at the podcast. It got a little bit extreme. It was a little much.
It was kind of like a boardroom meeting at one point.
It is a boardroom, kind of like a business podcast like this one is.
Totally.
Now, the evolution of the podcast continues. As we speak, there are things in place and plans, tentative plans in place about this future of this podcast. Greg, can you just give the people a teaser of what to expect?
Yeah. So we have found the Extra Podcast a really valuable way of engaging with some of the common questions that people would raise. Particularly about sermons, but about other things as well. And if you've been a long-time listener, you know that this podcast has taken on many different forms and has had different segments and different hosts, all that kind of stuff. This past year, though, we did a little bit of reflection, and we started asking ourselves the question, just from a pure discipleship perspective. If we could start over with a podcast strategy, what would we want to do in podcasts to best disciple people? If the goal is to make disciples, the question was, does the current podcast roster, particularly the Extra Podcast and the Bonus Podcast, do those podcasts actually get at how we want to disciple people? And so I think the question, and then we had an idea came to mind, which was the sound you just heard, was the idea that came to our mind when we were in the meeting. And we were talking about basically, look, if we had the opportunity to, again, I think we would still want to have a way to engage with people about, talking through what was just heard on the sermon. How do we unpack that difficult text? How do we unpack that difficult application? Was there anything that you wish you could have said that you didn't because of time? All that kind of stuff. So there's still, I think, going to be a place for that kind of a conversation moving forward. It'll probably be a little bit of a shorter one, like a 15 to 20 minute podcast, probably still called something like Extra, to show, this is like an extra little conversation on top of the sermon. We also, though, see huge value in part of what the Extra Podcast and what the Bonus Podcast talk about is some of the more practical theological stuff. Like how does this Christian thing apply in our culture, or how do we see the culture opposing this Christian value or principle or doctrine? And so I think we will have another podcast that focuses more on kind of everyday issues, the usual subjects that people normally talk about, stuff that's trending in the Christian culture. So that'll kind of play a role in helping scratch that bonus podcast itch, which is mostly what Crystal and Thalia and the team over there have been focusing on. But we also, two things. So we're kind of continuing the Extra Bonus podcast, but with a little bit more focused content, and probably a little bit on the shorter end for both of those. Okay. And then we're going to add 2 more podcasts to the roster. And those ones are going to be focused on studying Scripture and just reading passages of Scripture and talking through them. And we're also going to be having another podcast focused on the content that we go through at our Thursday morning theology class. Have about a 30-minute review of what did we just talk about at Thursday morning theology, and why does that matter for us as a church?
Cool. So that'll be good for people who maybe can't make the Thursday AM theology class, but they want to catch up and listen to at least some of the teaching.
Yeah.
Okay.
So that's the plan. If you've been a part of Northview for any stretch of time, you'll know that we make plans and then we change them because we have to adapt to different stuff. So I don't have any real specific details about when that plan's going to unfold, or if it's going to include all 4 of those podcasts, or maybe only 2 or 3 of those podcasts. But eventually our goal is that we're going to be able to have 4 weekly podcasts that come out that will be intended to help disciple us as a congregation to think through more about the sermon, to think through some important cultural issues, to read the Scriptures and talk about what passages mean together, and to think about some more theologically proper categories like systematic theology, that kind of stuff.
Cool.
So yeah, we're going to do our best to try to unroll that lineup in the coming months, probably launch something over fall a little bit more formally. So we might be taking a bit of a break at some point over summer from some of these podcasts to kind of give us a fresh start, but you'll probably hear more about that as the days and weeks come along here. We're going to focus first of all on getting the AGM done and getting some of the vision nights for the East Abbotsford campus done. And then once those dominoes have fallen, then I think we'll have some more information on when we're starting those and who's going to be involved in those podcasts, all that kind of stuff.
Well, you heard it here first, folks. Because you are our devoted listeners, we wanted you to know some of the discussions.
And feel free to send in your feedback.
Yeah, actually,
about what you think about that. Email us at extra@northview.org. Let us know what you think about having a more focused Extra podcast that focuses more specifically on the sermon, and then leaving some other conversations about theology and about culture to other podcasts that can have a more focused intent as well.
Great. Well, folks, thank you for listening to this episode. It's a quick one. We have things to get to, don't we, Greg?
You know what? We also, we are recording this a little bit later in the day because we had a going away lunch for one of our long-term staff members, Cecilia.
Almost 10 years, right?
Steenkamp. She was our office manager and executive assistant for over a decade. Mm-hmm. And she's moving with her family to Australia in the summer. And so we just had a going away lunch. And so people were a little shook, man. She's one of those people that when people think about Northview, they think about, the names of pastors. But in reality, the ministry of this church would look vastly different had Cecilia not worked as hard and as diligently as she did. So we all gave her all kinds of praises behind the scenes, but you all should know as listeners that it's the men and women who serve on weekends, who serve behind the scenes, who serve on staff, who serve in all kinds of different capacities, some publicly, some privately, some with all kinds of thanks and email, and some completely thankless for decades, that make Northview Community Church who we are as a church family. And so Cecilia was a major part of that, and she's going to be dearly missed. So part of the reason why some people aren't here that normally are is that they're finishing off some conversations with her and blessing her and praying for her. And so, we'll pick up the podcast next week, and I'm sure Daniel will have a more intriguing guest and talk about something more than just some business stuff. But hey, sometimes you just got to get to work.
It is a work podcast,
just
Greg.
Give some people some information.
The church can't always be fun. You got to do some work sometimes too.
Once in a while.
Great. Well, thank you for listening, and we'll see you next week.